Let's all go off the record for a minute. Listen to what President Obama said about the attack on a kosher deli in Paris.
It is entirely legitimate for the American people to be deeply concerned when you've got a bunch of violent, vicious zealots who behead people or randomly shoot a bunch of folks in a deli in Paris.
Random? Well, now that's a bit off the charts bizarre. If he thinks that slaughter was random, it was a kosher deli in a Jewish neighborhood. What could be more obvious than that it was targeted and not random than a hit on a kosher deli in a Jewish neighborhood, right? Well, then today the State Department spokesperson was asked about it, and although it seems impossible, she gave a worse answer than the president.
I believe, if I remember the victims specifically, there were not all victims of one background or one nationality. So I think what they mean by that is, I don't know that they spoke to the targeting of the grocery store or that specifically, but the individuals who were impacted.
Does the administration believe that this was an anti-Jewish an attack on the Jewish community in Paris?
I don't think we're going to speak on behalf of French authorities and what they believe was the situation at play here.
Okay, what was that? Jen Psaki later tried to clarify her remarks on Twitter, posting, "We've always been clear that the attack on the kosher grocery store was an anti-Semitic attack that took the lives of innocent people." And White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest also taking to Twitter today, trying to defend the president's comment, tweeting, "Our view has not changed. Terror attack at Paris kosher market was motivated by anti-Semitism. POTUS didn't intend to suggest otherwise." Well, my thought, maybe one of his aides should tip him off not to say random if that's not what he means. And that's my off-the-record comment tonight. And joining us our political panel, the Wall Street Journal's John Bussey and the National Review's Jillian Melcher. John, am I being overly picky about the president saying random, not random?
At the end of the day, probably yes. You know, that was probably a word that he wishes that he hadn't used because it begat this confusion through the day. And it reminded you, don't have like 15 bureaucrats between you and what you're trying to say. People trying to reinterpret and justify and reinterpret. Come out with a tweet and say, it was anti-Semitic. We've always said that. That's what it was.
I guess the question is because, and now we go to you, Jillian, is that, and one of the reasons is that if he were sort of a first offender on this, you know, we've got the situation where it won't say Islamic extremism, so we all sort of have a hair trigger on, like, you know, we analyze his, maybe we're hypersensitive to what he says, but we analyze what he says.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of two problems. It's either not knowing your enemy or it's not being precise in your words. Both are dangerous. The first is dangerous for obvious reasons. I think the second is dangerous for a little bit more subtle reasons, and that's that, you know, like Orwell said, when you're slovenly with language that has potential to lead to foolish thoughts. I think the president's been very slovenly with language when it has to deal with the jihadist threat, and that's potentially leading to foolish policy.
And I guess I do feel, sometimes I can't figure it out whether I'm being petty or not, you say picky or not. I can't decide. I mean, is this important? Is it important that he says Islamic jihadism or Islamic extremism? Does it say that he really knows the enemy or not?
You know something? Yes. It's important for us to go through parsing the language because very often policy changes are communicated through subtle. I mean, look at us parse the Fed, for heaven's sakes, you know, from week to week. Sometimes policy is indicated through that, but sometimes also we can get too picky. You know, did he mean random in the sense of an event happening, nothing to do with trying to isolate it from anti-Semitism? Did he suggest that this was not an act toward Jews? Very doubtful, given the circumstances and the fact that, quite frankly, I'm not sure that this is exactly a president who you could say is slovenly with language. He's probably one of the most articulate, thoughtful with language that we've had in a generation.
What happened to his spokesperson at the State Department? She just got off on a bad foot too?
You know, I suspect that that's exactly what happened. And that's why you don't want to have bureaucrats sort of reinterpreting what you have said. Come out with a tweet. Make it clear. You know, make it as soon as that question came from the press, the tweet should have appeared.
And at least she did finally send out a tweet, and Josh Earnest too.
She did, but I will say, you know, I think it's the fault of not being particular with language. If even the president's bureaucrats are confused about what he's actually saying, how is the American public supposed to know what he's saying?
I don't know. Anyway, I never know if I'm being too picky, or if it's a real serious matter. But anyway, panel, thank you.
Thank you.
And straight ahead, new trouble for the suspect in the kidnapping and murder of a UVA co-ed, Hannah Graham. The latest, plus our legal panel is here next. And you do not want to miss this. Green Bay Packer great, number 4, Brett Favre, is right here to go on the record.